Arizona voters are declaring their independence from the two main political parties. And according to a new survey being released Monday, from the way those parties force them to select candidates. The survey by Arizona State University's Center for an Independent and Sustainable Democracy has important takeaways for voters, elected officials, and the people who run our elections. Joining us are the center's co-directors, Tom Riley and Jackie Salet. Jackie Salet also advocates for the rights of independent voters as president of independentvoting.org. Welcome to Sunday Square Off.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Tom, I'll start with you. What is the center's mission? It's relatively new to folks.
It is. It's looking at basically nonpartisan alternatives to our election system. And it's doing a deeper dive into who the independent voter is. They increasingly become a large portion of our electorate. They're third in Arizona. And it's understanding their voting patterns and who they are.
I want to jump on that number with you, Jackie, because this past week we learned that independent voters, registered independents who basically don't declare any party, are now a plurality of the voters, the largest slice of the three slices we have, Democrats, Republicans. And that's for the first time in, I think, 9 years. Is that a trend that comes and goes, or do you think it's here to stay?
I think it's here to stay. I think it's increasingly the case that voters don't want to be forced into a category. They want to vote for the person, not the party. They feel that the parties are corrupt and that they're more interested in their own self-perpetuation than in doing what's right for the people that they're supposed to be representing.
And so why did you take on this sweeping survey? Because this is really in-depth, something you don't see that often.
We wanted to take a look at whether the two camps, as they're described and understood generally, which is you either believe in election integrity or you believe in election reform, we suspected that perhaps those borders were not so hard and fast as people thought, and so we wanted to take a look at how voters across the spectrum, Democrats, Republicans, and independents, feel about those questions, and we made some amazing discoveries in the course of that.
And we'll get to that in a minute. When we talk about the results, Tom, who are we talking about here? Who are the voters we're hearing from?
So we interviewed a little bit over 1,000 registered voters. And they were proportionally divided between Republicans, Democrats, and independents, as well as reflecting the ethnic, geographic, and age breakdown in Arizona.
So it's registered voters, but they haven't all necessarily been
so we had a large
frequent
sample.
voters, or likely voters.
We looked at all, they're all registered, and then we broke it down between non-voters and voters. So those that were registered and didn't vote in 2022 versus those that voted. So we have, an ability to kind of break down those numbers in a lot of different ways.
Let's get to the takeaways. Number one for me, and I think for you guys, Democratic, Independent, and Republican voters overwhelmingly support open primaries and about the same numbers. What is an open primary, and why do you think it's so popular?
An open or nonpartisan primary is a primary where all candidates compete directly against each other. There's not a separate party primary. There's one primary. All the candidates compete against each other. All voters, regardless of their status, can vote. And the winners of that primary, it varies in number, there's an option as to how to do that, go on to a general election. It's also the case that all candidates, regardless of what party or not party they're affiliated with, have the same ballot access requirements. So it's really a leveling of the playing field, and it says, hey, we're going to have a first round of elections that is nonpartisan. Parties can compete in that, candidates can compete in that, but they're not going to run it.
So all the candidates have an R, D, or I, or something else next to their name.
Whatever.
Why is it so popular?
Why is it
What's the appeal?
I think that the general attitude is that we've got to make a separation between the election process and the political parties. The parties can't run the competition, and right now that is the situation. A closed primary or a semi-open primary, which is what we have here in Arizona, doesn't do the trick. It just gives the parties too much control over the election process. Let them compete, but don't let them run the elections.
And ironically, this is the one thing the two parties do agree on.
Yes, it is.
They want
Across the board. I mean, voters are basically saying is that they shouldn't have to join a party to vote. And there is wide support, over 80% of all categories are supportive of that.
What's the evidence that voters with an open primary will get what the results they want, and I guess I should ask, what are the results they think they're going to get?
Well, I think that, if we look at it right now, it's a lot of decisions are made in the primary, right? And that because districts are heavily R or heavily D, whoever wins that goes on and wins the general. If you exclude a large portion of your electorate, like independents, from the primary, then they don't participate. In essence, they're not participating in the election. Right. So this is more of a fairness issue. And this, as I said, had broad support of all parties, is that people want to have the basic aspect of a fairness to vote, and they want that across the board.
And the parties will fight this, and it seems the only way to get this done is with a statewide ballot initiative. One was already in the works to get voters to approve the ranked choice voting. Somewhat complicated, don't want to get into it, but the person behind that, Chuck Coughlin, a well-known political consultant here, scrapped that plan in the last week, I believe, and now instead is going to try to get an open primary on the ballot in 2024. Have you been working with Chuck, or did he arrive at this on his own? And
no, I mean, we're aware, obviously, that Chuck is doing his own polling. We were looking more broadly at issues of voter confidence. We did ask questions about nonpartisan primaries as well as ranked choice voting. Ranked choice voting had a small majority, over 50%, but primarily was opposed by most Republicans.
I'm really interested in younger voters. Voters around 30 who've lived with the disinformation and the election lies for most of their adult life now, when you think about it. What did you find about their views and how they might differ from older voters?
That's such an interesting question, and we saw a lot of layers, I would say. But one thing that really stood out for me, which is both about younger voters but also voters more generally, is that the level of trust in the standard institutions and sources of information is very, very low. And the two institutions that were the least trusted were political leaders and social media.
I did not get that.
Which is wild.
Yes, because I'm assuming they get most of their information from social media.
Well, young people do, but I think there's a growing recognition that the information that's coming out through those sources has all kinds of agendas that are behind it, and people are just feeling like they can't actually learn about issues, learn about candidates, learn about facts and policies, and find ways to address the problems that people are facing.
And so here's what I found to be the most depressing or discouraging finding. It wasn't a finding, but something I just kind of put together as I'm reading it. It's clear to me that the last 8 years have had an impact on voters. They now understand what the agenda is from people who think elections are rigged, and on and on. And at the same time, as you point out, they don't trust the information they're getting.
Well,
did you feel that way when you sum it all up?
I mean, I think definitely is that the trust in mainstream institutions around election information is an all-time low. Right. But I think one of the other findings that kind of underscores individuals kind of eroding distrust in the system is this high support, significant support, is that Arizona voters want their top election officials, Secretary of States and recorders, to be elected in a nonpartisan manner. They also want those individuals to take an oath of office to act in a nonpartisan fashion. Voters took a very dim view of those officials engaging in political activities. And if you think of this, is that nonpartisan election administration is a staple in Western democracies. So those that are running the election have no a stake in the outcome, and so the electoral agencies are both legally and administratively shielded from partisan actors. So, this finding that individuals don't want partisans running our elections, I mean, you think of it, is that so they run this very partisan election where they're attacking each other back and forth in very polarized language, and then the day after, they're supposed to be trusted as this neutral arbiter of elections. people are saying is that they want nonpartisans running it. Basically is that, this partisan administration has kind of eroded public trust, and it has intensified partisan gamesmanship, which in returns erodes public trust.
That gets back to what I said earlier. That's part of the agenda of the election deniers, and it's part of the misinformation they point out. Is that because of actions by these officials, or just because of the image that's been presented and repeated over and over?
I think it's been repeated in the media, right? But I think the optics, again, of having top elected officials who are very partisan oversee elections, and as this obscure office of Secretary of State become more in the limelight, and people are paying more attention to it, people are thinking, it's a bit odd that we have partisans who are running, and then they may not be doing anything inappropriate, but it's just a presence that they're partisans running an election system. As I said, we're the only Western democracy that does that.
Jackie, I'll end with you. What do you want people to take away? If there's one response, one roadmap to take away, what is that?
I think it's that we have to take steps, and the survey points in many different directions along these lines, to make a separation between the conduct of the election process itself and the activity of politics. We can't conflate those things any longer. They've been conflated for too long, and it has really degraded, as Tom was saying, the public trust in the democratic process. And part of what you see in our survey is that people want to do that, and they think it's possible to do that, which I thought was a great aspect of the result. There is a hopefulness you can build that wall, and it will yield results.
Jackie Salet, Tom Riley, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for having us.